State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top story this evening. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the UK is ready to provide support to Israel after it was attacked by the terrorist organisation Hamas. Now, those of you watching on television can see live footage of Gaza, where Israel says 800 Hamas targets have been hit, killing hundreds of fighters with dozens more captured. We can see flames there in the distance on the Gaza skyline. Now, earlier on, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said they will turn anywhere Hamas terrorists are hiding into, quote, an island of ruins, and he urged the people of Gaza to leave those areas now. More than 700 Israelis were killed and more than 1,500 injured in yesterday's surprise attack by Hamas. At least 313 Palestinians also died after Hamas fired thousands of rockets and gunmen stormed the border. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht is the IDF's international spokesperson. He described the scene on the ground.
The visuals are ISO visuals. In a way, this is our 9/11. This is our 9/11, and you know, even more than that. I mean, it wasn't crashing into a building. It's also mutilating and attacking a party that was happening around the Gaza Strip, a nature party, attacking civilians, kidnapping a grandmother.
Well, Londoners will see more police over the coming days as the Met steps up patrols amid reports of demonstrations in support of Hamas. Videos have been posted to social media showing people clapping and cheering with flags waving in support of the Hamas terrorist organisation. A spokesperson for the Metropolitan Police says they're aware of protests due to take place over the coming days and they'll take a zero-tolerance approach to any activity which crosses the lines into criminality. Well, a protester briefly interrupted speeches at a Labour conference event this morning. He was quickly removed from the stage before Angela Rayner took him to the podium to officially open the event. Labour's deputy leader took the opportunity to present the party as a contrast to over a decade of Conservative government.
Tories also have one singular focus: to desperately cling on to power. That's why the Tories' Levelling Up project was dead on arrival. You cannot level up from the top down. The Tories only know how to centralise power and hold wealth where it benefits them.
Angela Rayner. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's time for Camilla Tominey.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show live from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. We've of course got another big lineup of guests for you as ever. I'm joined now by Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary and MP for Ilford North for Labour. Wes, lovely to see you this morning.
Good morning, thanks for joining me. Thanks for having me
on. Let's ask you first of all for your reaction to what's gone on in Israel over the past 24 to 48 hours.
I think the barbarity that we're seeing unfolding on our television screens and on our social media feeds is horrifying. I cannot imagine what people in Israel are going through, and I mean literally cannot imagine what it must be like to be under that kind of threat of violence, kidnap, murder. I think there's no justification for it whatsoever. It needs to be unequivocally condemned. And to those who support the cause of Palestinian human rights and statehood, as I do, and I think most of us would, this isn't resistance we're seeing, it's terrorism, and our country's got to stand against it and stand with Israel's right to defend itself.
On that note, I mean, I know you've always been very strong in your positioning about a past association with anti-Semitism in the party. As you say, Hamas is a terrorist organisation, yet we've seen some people celebrating this in the streets of London. I mean, should the police investigate them for hate crimes potentially, do you think?
Certainly, I think they need to look at whether crimes are being committed here, and I would say to people who, I think with justification, worried about Palestinian human rights, worried about the escalation of violence, want to see a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel, what we're seeing on our screens not only can't be justified in human terms, and the barbarity and the fear that the families are going through, it also sets back the cause of peace.
Yes.
And so people celebrating on the streets of London and elsewhere in the UK got to ask themselves, where is their humanity? And do they think that that's going to build support for a just cause or set it back? Because I genuinely believe the only future for Israelis and Palestinians is a two-state solution through peaceful negotiation.
Yeah.
And the pursuit of that cause is made harder, not easier, by what we've seen.
Can I just point out some of your colleagues are going to be attending pro-Palestinian events in the coming days at conference. We already saw your colleague Asbana Begum, who's the Labour MP for Poplar and Limehouse. She was posing with Palestinian activists yesterday. We've got John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor, Jess Barnard, who's on Labour's NEC, Mick Whelan, the General Secretary of ASLEF, all planning to go to a Justice for Palestine event on Tuesday. Is this appropriate?
Well, I would draw a distinction between legitimate and serious events and campaigning for a just cause. And the celebration of violence. But what I would say to people in this of all weeks, if you are going to attend such events or show your support for the just cause of a Palestinian state, also take the opportunity to condemn unequivocally the violence that we're seeing perpetrated against Israelis, because we in the Labour Party, we support a two-state solution, we support the Palestinians' right to their own state, but we stand unequivocally with Israel and her right to defend herself.
Some of the organisers here.
I mean, I can't imagine what would,
But some of the organisers of these events,
we defend ourselves.
They're planning to march on the Israeli embassy. I mean, that is totally inappropriate for any Labour MP to be associated with people doing that.
The only march that should be taking place on the Israeli embassy today is a march of solidarity with the Israeli people and with those families that have lost loved ones or are desperately frightened for loved ones. That's the solidarity that should be shown today.
John McDonnell needs to think twice about seeming to be on the side of some of these Palestinian activists at this time. Show some sensitivity.
I'd just say, particularly against this backdrop, the horrifying scenes we've seen on our television screens, condemn unequivocally the violence, the senseless violence,
and if they don't,
against Israelis. I actually think they will, because I think that I don't understand how, as a human being, you could see these scenes and not show compassion and support for families that are going through something that I simply can't imagine.
Let's move on to your brief, because you're the man who hopes to be the next health secretary. You've announced that you're trying to cut waiting times. We've heard from Keir Starmer today as well. He's given an interview to the Sunday Mirror where he says he's got a 1.5 billion plan to bring these numbers down. How are you going to do that? Not least when you talk about more diagnostic testing, you're going to need more staff. And that's been a problem for the NHS for the last 3 decades or more.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's why we're committed to the biggest expansion of NHS staff in history, doubling the number of doctors, more nurses, the staff that the NHS needs to treat patients on time, but everyone knows that takes time. And we can grip the immediate crisis in the NHS of the backlog on the waiting lists if we're smart about how we use the capacity that's there in the system. So using tried and tested methods that are already being used in a small number of NHS trusts in the country, but could be deployed elsewhere. We will fund £1.1 billion for evening and weekend clinics, delivering 2 million more appointments a year. That's
and aren't you going to get pushback from the unions on that, though? Do they want to work evenings and weekends?
Well, look, I can offer them the reassurance that staff are not going to be compelled to do this. We don't need all staff, anything like all staff, to do this.
You're going to have enough staff to do it, then?
When I have spoken to the unions about it, I think what they say is, as long as it's not compulsory and as long as staff are paid fairly,
but
which they would be, it's £1.1 billion into the pockets of NHS staff. Yeah, because I think, look, this is where the government have got it fundamentally wrong on the NHS workforce. The doctors, the nurses, the midwives, the porters, the cleaners who got us through some of the darkest times in the history of the NHS with the pandemic, they really care about their patients. They're willing to go the extra mile.
But you've got doctors, junior doctors still on strike. I mean, would you give them 35%? How much would you give them?
I've been honest with them and said we can't afford 35%.
Can we put a number on it?
But the beauty of what we've proposed with the 2 million more appointments is that's £1.1 billion into the pockets of NHS staff.
How much would you give them to stop them from striking?
Well, they know I'm not going to do shadow negotiations.
Well, go on, just give us a general ballpark.
No, I'm not going to do shadow negotiations.
Is 35 too much?
If I were
little?
the health secretary today, I wouldn't be daft enough to give away my negotiating position. And I actually wouldn't expect the government to either. But we would be willing to sit down and negotiate. And I think, again, that's where Rishi Sunak's got this wrong, because he's not done a single day of negotiation with NHS staff.
Yeah.
And given the damage the strikes are doing to the NHS,
but we would like to get a ballpark from Labour, I think. I think it's fair to ask, when people have had their hospital and doctor's appointments delayed and there's 7.6 million waiting, we would like to know from Labour, how would you solve it? What would you give them?
And I think the reassurance I can give is that during the last Labour government, there were no national strikes in the NHS, because we treated staff fairly, we negotiated with them, and we worked with them to deliver the shortest waiting times
Your
and the highest
plans for
patient
the
satisfaction
NHS
in history.
involve more privatisation?
Not privatisation. We will work with the private sector to bring down NHS waiting lists faster, for the simple reason we've got a two-tier NHS in our country at the moment, where those who can't get seen are left behind, and those who can afford to pay private are getting seen faster.
Have you ever paid privately?
No, I did when I worked at Comet. This is going to see how old I am now. When I was a student, I needed a small operation,
but is it
and
fair enough if
I had private insurance provided by my employer. I'm not going to judge people who go private. I'm not going to judge employers who provide private medical insurance or staff who take it up. Like, it's a perfectly reasonable choice to make. But what I want to make sure is that no one in this country ever feels forced to go private or gets left behind if they can't afford to go private. And I want to make the NHS so good that no one in our country feels the need to go private.
A couple of questions from Tony. First of all,
I was trying to read his lips to see what the question was.
He was talking about bus franchising. Will you bring that back? And he was also asking about social housing. I mean, it's obviously easy to criticise the Tories for 13 years of not enough house building, but equally they'll turn around and say there wasn't enough house building under Labour. Yeah, and that's a fair criticism as well, which you take on the chin. I'll say two things in response to that. First is we can already see the difference that Labour in power is making. Look at what Andy Burnham has done in Greater Manchester, bringing the buses back in-house, better value for taxpayers, lower fares for passengers, and we're seeing other Labour mayors doing similar things. We want a Labour government support people right across the country to deliver better bus services. And on the second point, which was just remind me about franchises, and sorry, we've talked about that. Social housing. Forgive me. Yeah.
So look, fair criticism that successive governments have got this wrong. Angela Rayner, who is now Shadow Housing Secretary, like me, grew up in a council flat. We relied on it.
How many more would you build?
Well,
have you got a target?
Angela's setting out her stall this week, so you can see in her speech.
What would you like to see it be? 300,000 a year or something like that?
Well, I'm not going to pluck a figure out of thin air.
We're reluctant to pluck figures out of thin air.
Yeah,
we would like to know, because you do want to govern this country.
I'll tell you why, and you'll be able to see everything spelled out in our manifesto. We're determined to make sure that every promise we make is a promise we can keep, because turning around this country is challenging.
Well, you say that. I mean, Keir Starmer said in 2015 he wanted to scrap HS2. Now he wants to keep it. He says he doesn't want to go back into the EU, but David Lammin is suggesting that he does. He's flip-flopped on quite a lot of policies. One minute they're stripping private schools of their charitable status, the next he's rode back on that.
Oh, hang on a
You've
second.
got a green prosperity pledge that Rachel Reeves has now said we can't afford. So he is Captain Flip-Flop, isn't he?
No, and I'll tell you what, on HS2, quite reasonably as a local MP, Keir had concerns about the disruption that would occur to some of the housing in his constituency. Those concerns were addressed. He thinks it's an important national infrastructure project. The whole Labour Party does. The government's just blown a hole in it.
Would you insist that some of the people who had to compulsorily sell their houses for a line that's no longer being constructed should be able to buy them back?
I bet they're feeling sick, and I bet they're feeling furious, and they should be. And what it says, and this is my deep anxiety about it, what it says is, in addition to the lost opportunity of the new rail infrastructure, the jobs, the opportunities and the supply chain, it also says to international investors and to other countries, Britain can't do big infrastructure anymore. And what a tragedy. We've got some of the best builders, the best architects, the most creative designers in this country. We can do big infrastructure.
So more HS2 from Labour?
But you need leadership. The problem is, Camilla, I would love to be able to say, look, don't worry, guys, we'll be in and we'll do HS2, but the government have blown a hole in it.
We need to leave it there, Wes. Thank you very much, Wes Streeting. Lovely to see you this morning.
I'll see you. Thanks for having me.
In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by Transport Secretary Mark Harper. We'll be back in just a moment.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever. And that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's bring Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, Tory MP for the Forest of Dean, into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Mark. It's great to see you this morning. In regard to Israel, morning, a horrific situation playing out on the streets of Israel today. I wondered what your reaction was to those celebrating this terror attack by Hamas on the streets of London. Should they be investigated by the police for hate crimes?
Well, look, the events of yesterday were barbaric, with Israel coming under attack from a terrorist organisation, Hamas, and the British government stands unequivocally with Israel, its right to defend itself and what it needs to do to deal with the Hamas threat. Hamas is, of course, a proscribed terrorist organisation in the United Kingdom, so anybody expressing support for it is committing an offence, and I would hope that the Metropolitan Police will investigate carefully any reports of anybody doing so, and will take all the necessary steps afterwards.
Thank you. Let's move on to domestic matters now. The Conservatives didn't have a great night in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. There was an 11% swing against the Tories there, 20% swing towards Labour. I mean, have the Conservatives given up on Scotland, Mr. Harper?
No, we absolutely haven't. I mean, clearly that contest was one where I think people thought that it was between Labour and the SNP, but no, we absolutely haven't. We're campaigning very hard. Our leader in Scotland, Douglas Ross, is the leader of the opposition in the Scottish Parliament, and we will continue campaigning strongly on important issues in Scotland, like, for example, the fact the government's renewed oil and gas licences. We're going to need to get that oil and gas out of the ground as we transition to a net zero future, and it's important that we do that, and that's been opposed by both Labour and the SNP. So we're fighting for the people of Scotland and growing the Scottish economy.
Naturally, I'll be asking you about HS2, Mr. Harper. On the 30th of June this year, you tweeted, and I quote, "In Japan, I saw the benefits high-speed rail can bring to connect communities and grow the economy. That's why, despite the global inflationary pressures, we remain fully committed to building HS2. Building it shows we believe in Britain. So does cancelling it show that you no longer believe in Britain?"
Not at all. It shows that when the facts change, you have to change your mind. So look, first of all, we've recommitted to building the first phase from London Euston to Birmingham, and we're continuing to deliver that, and that's having a big transformative effect, particularly on the economy in Birmingham. But look, we've looked at the cost pressures, the increasing cost pressures that are facing constructing this project, and the conclusion we came to was that those increased costs against the reducing benefits, partly because of the way business and commuter traffic has changed after the pandemic, means that it's a better use of taxpayers' money to take that £36 billion of savings and reinvest it in transport projects across the North, the Midlands and the rest of the country to deliver for the people of Britain. So I think the facts have changed.
All right, let's talk about
increasing cost pressures. That's why we made the decision we have.
Some might question whether the facts have changed since June, and also, let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. But let's look at that £36 billion to be spent on new transport projects in the north. Labour say 85% of them are old.
No, that's simply not true. I mean, let me give you an example. Last Thursday I was up in Bradford. We're now able to commit to building a new station, new lines to Bradford, improving their connections to Manchester and elsewhere. That was welcomed by the Labour Mayor, the Labour leader of the council, the Labour Mayor of West Yorkshire. They think that will help grow their economy and work very well with the ambitious regeneration plans they've got for the city. So I think that was a clear commitment, not able to be funded until we made the decision we did last week, but now able to be funded.
Why is the Metrolink tram to Manchester Airport in there as a new project when it was built in 2014?
Well, Because it currently goes to only one terminal of Manchester Airport. What we were talking about was extending it to the further terminal, so that's a new investment for a new piece of connection to the airport. I agree it could have been better worded, but it's very clear we're now going to extend that connection to the second terminal.
Could this whole document, I'm holding it up now, Mr. Harper, Network North, Transforming British Transport. Did you proofread this document as Transport Secretary?
Look, I'm very proud of that document. It's £36 billion of extra transport investment across, as I said, the North, the Midlands, and the rest of the country. I think there were significant projects in there that were not able to be funded previously. We can now deliver them over the years to come, and people will start seeing the benefits in a few weeks' time as we keep the bus fare capped at £2, not going up to £2.50, and money from next spring to local authorities to invest in local roads. And I think those are important priorities for people across the country.
But did you proofread this document? Because it's relocated Manchester and Preston. It suggests that Southampton and Portsmouth are in the north, that Littlehampton is in the north. I mean, if I turned in a piece of copy like this to the Telegraph, I think my editor would have a lot of problems with it. It's riddled with errors, isn't it?
Well, no, it isn't. Look, there was one mistake between that we had at Bognor Regis and Littlehampton one, which is a mistake. I agree that was a mistake, but look, it's a significant document, a significant amount of spending across the North, the Midlands, and the rest of the country. I think it will be widely welcomed in those parts of the country where people can see more transport investment. I accept not everyone will agree with the decision we took, but it was the right decision for the long-term interests of the country.
On the decision about the Manchester leg of HS2, are you going to apologise to the people that had to sell their homes? One man, I think it cost him his business, for nothing.
Look, I accept that for those people where their properties were purchased for the leg of HS2, it's not going to happen. Look, I don't expect them to be particularly happy with the decision we've taken, but it is the right decision for the country. There's a clear process now that will follow, legal process, to deal with all of those property claims. But look, I accept that for those people that have had a personal situation which has been difficult, they're not going to be particularly happy, but government has to make the right decision for the country, and that's what the Prime Minister did last week.
Are you going to be voting in favour of this smoking ban? I appreciate it's the ban of sales to children who are now 14. That includes my eldest child. But will you be voting in favour of that? Because I know you're a libertarian, Mr. Harper. I remember you being a very vocal force in the COVID research group. You don't like to tell your constituents what to do. So why are you making the exception on smoking?
So, well, look, first of all, it's a free vote, but I am going to be voting for it for this reason, and I'm very much, I think, in the same place as the Prime Minister. I'm not in favour of telling people what they can eat and what they can drink, because it's for people to judge the levels that they want to do themselves. The difference with smoking is there's no safe level of smoking. I don't think anybody wants their children to take up smoking, so I actually think this is a sensible plan to get to a point in the future where nobody smokes. I wouldn't support doing it for other things where there are safe levels, but I think for smoking there's no safe level of it. I think this is a good plan. Prevent children taking up smoking. We know that most people that take up smoking do so as children, and then they find it really hard to kick the habit. So I back the Prime Minister on this plan, and I will be voting for it.
But isn't obesity now a bigger killer than smoking?
Look, obesity is a big challenge for the NHS, and there is work to do on giving people the information they need to make choices about a healthy diet. But the difference is, it's for people to make judgments about how much of different sorts of food they consume. The difference with smoking is there's no safe level of smoking, and there's really no one that I've ever met that would like their children to take up smoking. So this plan is about making sure we stop children taking up smoking in the first place. It's good for public health, and I think it's the right thing to do, and I will be supporting it.
You were once Immigration Minister, I remember, under David Cameron. Would you use the same language as your colleague Suella Braverman when it comes to migrants, describing hurricanes, floods, torrents? Is she using the right rhetoric here?
Well, look, I think the point the Home Secretary is trying to emphasise is that there are a huge number of people around the world who would qualify under the refugee conventions, and we have to have limits on the number of people that can come here. That's why we are putting in place our plans that are opposed every step of the way by the Labour Party to tighten up on the rules. It's why we've had some success already with a 20% reduction in the number of people coming on those channel crossings, but we've got to break the back of the business model of those smugglers. Well, look, we all choose our own language. I choose my own. But look, the point she was making was that there's a significant number of people that could come to this country. We have to have controls and set the rules for ourselves. It has to be the British people that set the rules about who can come here. That was the point she was making, and I strongly support that particular point she was making. It's the government's policy, tough border controls, stopping the boats coming, and opposed every step of the way by the Labour Party.
When do you reckon the first flight to Rwanda will take off, Mr. Harper?
Well, look, as you know, that policy has been challenged in the courts. There's a court hearing tomorrow. I very much hope we'll be successful. It's worth just reflecting on the fact just today, the Labour leader was asked whether he would support the Rwanda plan, even if it was shown to be working, and he said he wouldn't. Now that doesn't make sense. We've got a clear plan to break the business model of these organised criminal gangs who traffic people across the channel and cause many of them to lose their lives. That's not the right thing to do. We're going to robustly implement our plan, and I look forward to seeing the first flights take off soon.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Mark Harper, Transport Secretary. Lovely to speak to you.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, we've seen these appalling scenes in Israel as fighting continues to break out. I'm going to be joined now by Sharon Haskell. She's the member of the Knesset for the centre-right party, the National Union Party. Sharon, thank you very much indeed for joining me. What I can only imagine is an absolutely appalling time for you and fellow Israelis. Can you describe the situation there for us to give us an idea of exactly what's going on?
Thank you, Camilla. This has been one of our most devastating attacks that we've experienced in more than 50 years since the War of Yom Kippur. This wasn't just a declaration of war by Hamas, but this was actually war crimes that were committed against the Israeli people. These were crimes against humanity. If you follow some of these videos that were published, these are women who has been taken as hostages. They infiltrated 22 towns in the country of Israel, in the state of Israel, going from house to house, completely massacring family after family. We're talking here about women, children, elderly. This is civilian, innocent civilian population. These are children. This was not just a declaration of war, but it was actually crime wars and acts against humanity committed by Hamas against Israel.
Sharon, before we go on, I just want to ask you whether you are safe, whether your family is safe. Do you have anyone directly connected to you that's been affected by what's happened so far?
Of course, I mean, we have 300 deaths and the body are being counted. We have 1,800 casualties and the numbers still are going up. One of the head of the municipalities in the area was shot dead while trying to defend his family, his wife, and his child at the entrance of his home. Now, this is a head of council that was trying to build an industrial area that is shared by Israelis and Gazan citizens. We've seen women being taken as hostages into the streets of Gaza. The sites that we are seeing are similar to the sites that we've seen in videos spread by ISIS, by Daesh, all around the Middle East. We are extremely worried about our hostages. These are women, children, elderly that are being taken to Gaza. And by what we've seen in the footages, they're being abused, being spat on in the streets of Gaza. I'm extremely worried. I'm worried about my family, my friends, members that I've known, that I know, and we're still looking for them. This is a devastating situation.
Are people trying to leave? Has there been a rush on the airports? I happen to have a friend who's got a relative in Israel. He's trying to come back via Jerusalem. What's the situation on the ground? One would imagine that Israelis are now living in fear of their lives.
So the military have recruited the reserve forces in order to go down to the south to bring back the safety and the security of the citizens in our country. It means that they're probably going to go, and they are trying now to still liberating 2, I think, towns left in order to bring those citizens into safety. The army put most of the citizens around the Gaza Strip in order to go into a full-on military defense move that is needed in order to liberate, children and women that are being taken hostage and are being held captive in Gaza. Unfortunately, Hamas has forced us to go into Gaza again. This is something that we didn't anticipate, because in 2005, Israel completely evacuated the Strip of Gaza from every single living Jew. They were given an autonomy. They were declared by the United Nations. And unfortunately, instead of building a beautiful Singapore from this area, the Gazan people have voted democratic elections and have turned it into a nest of terror while investing all of their funds, money, and energy on hatred, on violence, on arms to fight against Israel.
Sharon, what should the Western world do now? We've had some commentary in our papers this morning questioning Joe Biden's international leadership. Also, of course, the question of Hamas managed to carry out this surprise attack in the first place.
Well, Camilla, this will be remembered probably as the first day of war between Israel and Iran. Hamas doesn't have the capability of creating such an attack. We're talking of a whole battalion of terrorists running towards the fences, infiltrating 22 towns and massacring family after family. We have technological capabilities. We have a strong army. And you need to understand who is standing behind this attack. And it's Iran. The international community has to join forces together. They have to single out Iran and take them out of the United Nations, any kind of forum and any kind of membership, because they are standing behind one of the worst massacres that we've seen. This is not just, Camilla, an attack on Israel. This is an attack of extremist Islam, of radical Islam on the Western world. If they will prevail against a country who values the values of democracy, of freedom, of liberty, the next one in the line will be Europe, and more countries to follow up. This is a full war that Iran has opened against Israel and against the Western world and the values that we share and cherish so much.
Sharon Heskell, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning on what I know is a very, very difficult time for you and fellow Israelis. Try and stay safe. Well, don't go anywhere, because in just a minute I'm going to be getting some top political analysis from two top political wonks, GB News' own Christopher Hope and Tony Blair's former spinner, John McTernan. We'll be back in just a jiffy.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, live from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by, we're describing them as two political wonks. I don't know whether that's disparaging or not. John McTernan, former political secretary to Tony Blair, joins me, along with Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, who's had some kind of never-ending journey from Scotland down to Liverpool to be here today. Hello, chaps. Lovely to see you. I was just looking for some data. I'm going to try and remember it. It was from the Mail on Sunday today. Delta Poll have done a survey, and it asked those asked about both Rishi and indeed Keir being change candidates. And the bottom line is that this polling showed that people don't think either of them are the change candidate. No. I mean, who created the biggest stir at conference? It was Nigel Farage.
Yeah, wandering around. But saying nothing, by the way, free hit for him.
GB News' his own Nigel Farage.
Our colleague, Camilla.
Indeed so, our esteemed colleague.
Not saying anything, just existing.
I know, but what the point I'll put to John, you are very close to Tony Blair. There are people lining the streets going Blair, Blair, Blair in 97. That simply isn't happening with Starmer. He's not as charismatic. He hasn't got the wow factor. There was some comment about how he'd need to have some razzmatazz, or he was saying, I'm not going to have any razzmatazz, and everyone said, well, that doesn't surprise anyone, mate.
Oh, look, Keir is doing something right to be 20 points ahead in the polls. He's doing something right to
he's not the Tories.
To win Rutherglen so well. No, it's not simply not being the Tories, it would be a shrug. 20 points in the lead is Blair-style leads. In a world where, and I think this is important to understand, all people's hope in change has been beaten out of them. Mm-hmm. They've had a terrible decade with this government who basically decided, in the end, if we can't make things better, we'll try to persuade everybody that nothing can ever get better.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult situation to be the opposition, because in government you've got so much power to do things and persuade things. I think Keir offers the safety and the stability. Now, there's nothing flashy about stability, but it reduces costs, it makes things...
Chris wants to come in on that.
Is that not a risk though, John? I mean, you were around with Tony Blair back in 97-2001. His big issue he always talked about was why he wasn't bolder when he came in. Starmer, to me, is almost tiptoeing into office, not doing a lot. I mean, to say things like he would reverse Rwanda this morning elsewhere, he wants to build 1.5 million homes, that's not much more than the current government. Is not the risk you're so nervous about this the idea of the Ming vase he's carrying around number 10. If he drops it, it's all over, so he daren't do anything.
So the government aren't even meeting their own housing targets. They abolished housing targets. They've given up on housing. There was no mention of housing last week during conference, yet it's one of the top issues that people talk about. So the fact that Labour are committing, that Angie Rayner and now Keir committing to massive housing targets, that's really, really important for us, and for the country to hear that we're doing that. And the thing is, we're in a world where promises have been made by governments, by the 5 prime ministers that we've had, and then they've been broken by the next prime minister or broken by that actual prime minister. Keir is being really clear. He will make a promise and then they'll deliver it. So
but
back the builders, not the blockers.
John, let me just come in on that, because there has been some criticism. Where's the opposition? He didn't really react to the net zero climb down. We don't really know where he is with regard to some of his economic policies versus what Jeremy Hunt is going to announce in the autumn statement. There's been a climb down on some of the private school stuff, which seems to be the only identifiable policy.
There wasn't a climb down.
Well, there's a climb down on charitable status. They've watered it down, John.
The VAT is being levied. The VAT is being levied. That's what gets you the money.
Yeah.
Changing charitable status is 10 years in the courts.
But then we've got one policy. Let's allow more people to change sex. Do you think there are loads of people in the Red Wall in this area saying, do you know what I want from a next Labour Prime Minister? I want more people to change sex.
I'll tell you what people in the Red Wall, people in Merseyside, people in London, people in Scotland, what they believe. They don't believe that unhappy people should be made more unhappy by a government. And there's something about the way the government approaches the trans issue, like it approaches every issue. It wants to divide us and turn us against each other. And what our country needs is a decade of working together, all of us, to deal with the absolutely gigantic problems we face, whether it's climate transition, or whether it's getting productivity going, or whether it is improving our schools, improving our health and well-being.
Some might argue that trans activists have been quite divisive on that issue, but let's move on to Scotland, because John, I know you were also former Chief of Staff to Jim Murphy when he was Scottish Labour leader. Are the SNP finished?
No, the SNP aren't finished because there's going to be support for independence in Scotland for a very long time, in my view. It'd be the wrong thing for Scotland to do, and I don't believe a second referendum will happen. If it did, the SNP would lose again. Scotland would stay in the UK. But the SNP have taken a beating.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about it, they won't concede that they've taken a beating. Labour's majority was larger than the SNP vote. That's like back to that's pre-referendum politics. Labour as dominant. You have to accept when the voters send you a message, you've got to go, we got it. It's one of the reasons that Keir Starmer's taken Labour on a journey. He said, look, the voters were right to reject Jeremy Corbyn. The voters in Scotland were right to reject the SNP. If the SNP don't listen, they'll lose again and again and again.
Yeah.
So Labour can come back in Scotland and win seats. Labour can come back in the Scottish Parliament and maybe form an administration, but the SNP will still be there.
Chopper, is Scotland going to be the difference for Starmer between a minority and majority government?
It means you must win less votes in the Red Wall to win. I mean, 20 seats, 30 seats. Well, what's your forecast, John?
I think 20 seats in Scotland would be a brilliant result because the swing we got at 20% is twice the swing that there's been in the opinion polls in Scotland. If we got the 10%, the 11% swing that's in the opinion polls, we'd pick up about 20 in Scotland, and that changes the nature of politics.
Do you need people who support the union to vote for a Tory or Labour candidate and not between red and blue?
So what I think is happening in Scotland and in the rest of the country is they're looking at two governments, a Tory government and an SNP government, and they're going, what's the best way to get these people out? So in England it's Lib Dem or Labour, and in Scotland it's mainly Labour. There'll be some seats where Labour voters in the northeast vote for the Tories, and in the borders. So unionist voters are going to vote for the best candidate to beat the SNP to send them a message, because you've got a government, a Tory government, in power in UK for 13 years. SNP in power for 16 years.
Yeah.
In the end, political gravity asserts itself.
Chris, I asked the Transport Secretary Mark Harper earlier whether the Tories had given up on Scotland. I mean, that's what it looks like. That chap who went for the by-election in Rutherglen got 1,000 odd votes. I mean,
deposit.
Are Scottish Tories going to be an oxymoron come 2024?
Not an oxymoron. That's a big word for the Sunday morning.
I know, Jesus.
Yes.
No, it's the right word, though.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, sometimes they say young Tories an oxymoron, but we wouldn't necessarily agree with that. But Scottish Tory...
Rutherglen was a Tory seat till 64.
Yes.
When I worked out there with John for different newspapers, the turn of the century, John.
Exactly.
The big issue then was the poll tax. That was raised. That was the reason why the Tories hemorrhaged support. Yeah. And that's not really raised, is it? It's more. I mean, the Boris Johnson went down like a cup of cold sick up there. Yeah. I think Sunak is more popular, and maybe the follow of Sunak, whoever that is, if they lose, could be better.
The great John Curtis said about this. The Tories are on 15% in Scotland, but that's because they're unpopular across the whole of the country. If you're on 25 in the UK, you're going to have to be on 15 in Scotland. And so that Sunak may be more palatable than Johnson. The thing is, in the middle between Johnson and Sunak was Truss, and Truss has destroyed the trust with voters everywhere.
Yeah.
And until you can get over that moment, and I think Truss is the new poll tax.
So it's all about competency.
It's competence.
And that's why Starmer's untested. It's untested on competency.
But the Tories are clearly, it's funny, the government are the risk and the opposition are the safety. And that's where politics...
Although, let's just talk about somebody who is considered a bit risky in the Labour Party, Angela Rayner.
Ah, the goddess.
Is she? John, why'd you say that?
Because
which goddess?
She's got an appeal...
Right.
That reaches across politics.
Yeah.
She passed it. I wrote a piece for another of our former papers.
Feeling the crush going on here.
Explaining Angie Rayner's appeal. Angie Rayner is definitely a politician you want to go down the pub with.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to...
Unlike Keir Starmer, you might say.
No, but Keir, I've seen Keir in the pub. I had a taxi driver from GB News once, and he said, I met that Keir Starmer, I met him in a pub. He knows his football. He's good company.
True.
So, but Angie is just like, you look at her and she's fun. And there's so few politicians...
I know, but she's got to be careful because they're doing this whole safety first thing. We don't want her going off at fringes and calling Tories scumbags again, do we?
Might for news channels.
Well, we do want that for news,
yeah. No, you need some colour and character. You need a Mo Molam. You need a Peter Mann. Somebody who's larger than life. Angie's larger than life.
She's your Prescott, the new Prescott.
Yeah, no, she is. And
obviously, literally deputy leader like Prescott was.
Everybody needs a Prescott.
And she's going to be speaking later, I think, isn't she? 11:20 today.
So,
I think that's what I'm hearing in my ear, and my ear is never wrong. So Angie good, and final word, Rachel Reeves. I mean, to be fair, she's been a bit of a silent assassin, bringing up the rear,
the city
adding some competence to the operation.
The city loves her.
Right, the city loves her. This is curious.
But there's a line last week, though, there's a line last week from Rishi Sunak to the Bloomberg lunch. He said, beware Labour. They will tolerate you, but we love you. And that's what the Tories, said. So Labour tolerate business. It's not a love thing.
I did a dinner in the city a week ago, and it was a room which had £1 trillion under investment, and they were all clear. Labour is the next government, and they trust Rachel for her stable management of the future economy.
Well,
and that's the thing, that Labour, they don't see a risk.
This place is rammed. I mean, gone are the cardigans of the Corbyn era. Everyone's wearing sharp suits like GB News staff.
We've got more tickets sold to conference than any time in Labour history. It's the biggest attendance.
Well, you heard it here first. John McTernan, Christopher Hope, gone are the cardigans of the Corbyn era. I think we'll end on that note.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. After a mixed weekend, most of us will start off on a relatively dry, if cloudy, note for the start of the new working week. There is still some rain around across Scotland. It will gradually be pushing its way southwards into parts of Northern Ireland. We're going to Dumfries and Galloway, the Scottish borders, maybe the far north of England as well. Elsewhere, a largely dry night to come. A lot of cloud pushing into Irish Sea coastal areas. Will turn quite misty and murky here, but a mild one for many of us. Temperatures not dropping much lower than 11 to 15 degrees Celsius, so really quite a mild start to Monday morning. And we will see this thick area of cloud for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern areas of England could bring some drizzly outbreaks of rain, easing off a touch into the afternoon. Some of the cloud across Irish Sea coastal areas again could linger throughout the day as well, but move further inland, and there will be some sunny intervals to enjoy. Some wispy cloud around, making the sunshine hazy at times, but temperatures notably above average for the time of year, between 17 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into Tuesday, there is signs that the frontal system is going to start pushing its way in from the northwest, gradually sinking southeastwards as we head throughout the middle part of the week. So starts its way off across northwest Scotland, could bring some localised flooding in places, and on top of the rainfall that we've already had, there could be some disruption in places, so do just take care here. Elsewhere, again, throughout Irish Sea coastal areas across the Channel as well, there could be a little bit of mist and fog lingering, but a generally fine day elsewhere. That rain, though, will arrive across central and southern areas as we head towards Wednesday and Thursday.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on